Hey guys, how we doing? Today in the vlog I want to talk about can you practice improvising, or how can you practice improvising? You might have noticed that the videos that I've been doing in the last couple of weeks on my YouTube channel have all been examples from the Versatile Drummer package, and if you're interested in that you can click the link below and read more about it. But some of the Versatile Drummer package is basically teaching all the styles that I did in the original Versatile Drummer video, which became quite popular on YouTube a number of years ago. And some of the styles that I play at the end of that video are in the jazz style, or different types of playing you might do in different jazz scenarios. I think there's a fast jazz thing, and like a 6/8 thing, and a broken feel, and different types of jazz playing. So a lot of people will associate improvising with jazz, and of course you can absolutely, a large part of jazz is improvising. Not every jazz gig that you do is going to be 100% improvised. So, if you're playing in a big band or something, you'll be playing the hits and you'll be reading the chart and, setting up figures and doing things the same way every time you play it. But then there might also be other sections within that same chart where you do improvise. So you might have a solo or whatever. So obviously improvising is a really, really important skill to have, especially for a contemporary musician. And if you play drum kit, you're pretty much by definition a contemporary musician. So a lot of people learn to improvise through jazz. If you've grown up listening to jazz records and you've listened to great improvisers, Miles Davis, Coltrane, on and on and on, a lot of people learn about improvising through jazz, or maybe you're in the jazz program at your school or something like that, and you learn to do it through being taught how to do it. That's awesome. But of course you can improvise in any style. It's not just a jazz thing. So even though I'm deciding to talk about improvisation because I did some jazz examples on that Versatile Drummer video, the reality is you can improvise in any style. You can improvise in Latin American, Indian drummers have been improvising for hundreds of years. You can improvise in prog rock, on and on and on. So how do you get good at improvising? How do you practice improvising? Obviously it's something you need to practice, but how do you practice it? Because if it's like true improvising is being spontaneous, well, you need to practice with other musicians. You need to get together with a little group and jam and just trade ideas, trade 4s or 2s or 8s, or take entire choruses, entire forms of the tune that you're playing. So one thing that I often do at the end of my lessons with students is spend a good 5 minutes or so just trading drum solos. And we're not trying to out-chop each other. We're just trying to be creative, because there's a good chance that for the majority of the lesson, even though people consider the pursuit of music and playing an instrument to be a creative endeavor, the reality is that a lot of what we do when we learn music is not actually creative. I had a professional development a few years ago at one of the schools that I teach at, and it was fascinating. The guy was who came in, who was from a really well-respected music uni here in Melbourne. He came in and he did this presentation. He'd done this study where he'd hooked up musicians, electrodes on their brain and whatnot, on their head, sorry, and he was able to measure when the creative part of the brain was actually switched on. And what he found was there's only 2 instances where it happens. The first is when you're improvising, or if you're composing your own original music. Everything else is not creative in that sense. So a lot of what we do is actually digital recall or rote learning when we learn an instrument. And so what I'm saying with, when I teach my lessons is that, we might spend some time on the rudiments, we might spend some time on some charts or some exercises and some vocab. That is not being creative. It's not to say it's easy. It's not to say you don't have to learn those skills. Absolutely, you've got to put in the work. But that work specifically is not actually creative. But it is important to know how to be creative. You've got to develop that instant recall of your vocab. So that's really important. Get together with some people, with some other human beings, and trade off each other, learn to be creative. Also, another thing I'd like to address, a lot of musos kind of get caught up in this headspace of, I must not be a pattern player. I must not play patterns. And I get it. You don't want to think in terms of patterns. But the reality is that, first of all, the reality is that everything you ever play and everything you're ever going to play, if you dissect it, it can be traced back to a pattern. It's either going to be a single stroke, a double stroke, a flam, which is just two single strokes next to each other, or a buzz roll. So everything we play is a pattern. The difference is beginners think in terms of patterns because they only have a limited vocab of a few things that they can do or say. Whereas as you get better at improvising, you think in terms of musical phrases, and the patterns are like little words that you put together in a sequence to say a sentence, a musical sentence, which is a musical phrase. But make no mistake, everything you play is a pattern, right? So my advice would be, absolutely learn patterns. Learn as many patterns as you can because they're just little words. Bragum, that's a word. Bragada. Bragada, 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 the Tony Williams type stuff coming off the toms with the left flam triplet. That's a word, you know. Steve Gadd, like the Motown fill, the 6-stroke roll. That's a word, and they're all patterns as well. But you're going to order them in some kind of logical sequence that makes sense musically, depending on the environment you're playing in at the time, and that's the difference. More advanced musicians who've practiced improvising, and not every great player is a good improviser, by the way. You can be an amazing player and be a terrible improviser, but the good improvisers who've practiced it a lot, they've got instant recall of their vocab, they can hear something and play it straight away, they've developed that skill, and they have a large vocab that they can draw on to begin with because they've practiced a lot of patterns. So don't get caught up in this idea of, I must not play patterns. Everything you do is a pattern. But don't think in terms of patterns. Think in terms of musical phrases. That's the difference. All right? So, absolutely, you can practice improvising, but it's not really a thing where you're just going to sit in your room and necessarily do all your improvising practice on your own. You can do some of it on your own. You might want to set up a track where you play along for 4 bars of a groove, any kind of groove, and then you improvise freely for 4 bars. That's fine. But I think real improvising works at its best when you're playing with other people. All right? So get together, organise jam sessions once a week with some friends or some musos that you know, or go along to a jam session that's in your local community or somewhere around town and get involved and really practice. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like when you're improvising, a lot of what you say, especially when you're starting out, it's going to sound really average because you're flying by the seat of your pants. You're creating on the fly. But just like I'm talking to you now, the more you do it, the more articulate you're going to get with your improvising. So when we talk to people, we don't know ahead of time what we're going to say because it all happens in real time. And if I'm having a conversation with you, depending on what you say to me, I then think about a response and I come out with what I'm going to say next. But I don't know ahead of time what I'm going to say. And it's exactly the same with your improvising on an instrument. All right? So there you go. That's the vlog, guys. You can practice improvising, and it's a really, really important skill, especially for a contemporary musician. Hope you've enjoyed the vlog. See you next time.